Story 1. This is my first time really using Reddit, so I apologize if it's not the best formatted. I was recently reminded of a time when I practiced some malicious compliance as a kid. For context, I have an extremely severe allergy to peanuts and tree nuts. If I eat or touch peanuts or nuts, I can go into anaphylactic shock, which means my throat closes up, and I'll essentially choke to death. I carry an epinephrine pen with me at all times because of this. Now, let me provide some additional information on this teacher. She absolutely disliked children. She was the type of teacher who would yell at kids if they got something wrong. To keep everything anonymous, I'll call her Mrs. Idiot, and I'll refer to myself as me. With that out of the way, here's the story. I was in first grade, and by this time, I had a good understanding of how serious my peanut and nut allergy was. I always read labels, never ate other people's home-cooked meals, and knew not to trust someone just because they said, "I don't think it has nuts in it." If you don't know, then don't offer those foods to small children who may not know any better. It was first grade, and I was having fun coloring something on paper while waiting for my teacher. As I was finishing my drawing, my teacher brought out a fun activity worksheet that involved candy. If I remember correctly, it involved counting or something related to math. As she was passing out the worksheets and candy, I noticed that they were M&Ms, which I am allergic to. The interaction went something like this. Me, Mrs. Idiot, I can't have these. I'm allergic. Mrs. Idiot, they're original M&Ms. They don't have peanuts in them. Me, but my mom says I'm allergic to the originals too. Mrs. Idiot, they're fine. You can have them. To this day, I don't know why a teacher would ever tell a kid with allergies to eat something the kid thinks or knows they're allergic to. While original M&Ms don't have peanuts or nuts directly in them, they are made on the same equipment as peanut M&Ms. This exchange went on for a while, with the teacher insisting, "They're fine," and me repeating, "They're not." I think the teacher actually believed I was purposely trying to annoy her. "Mrs. Idiot, if you don't start behaving, I'm going to call your mother, and you will be in big trouble." The younger me realized that my mom was just going to say the same thing I was saying, so instead of telling her that, I sat there, smiled at the teacher, and said, "Okay, call her." I remember wondering why the teacher just didn't believe me. Looking back, that teacher definitely disliked being told she was wrong, especially by a first grader. Mrs. Idiot looked annoyed but smug, probably thinking that my mom would yell at me for not wanting to risk my life, or have a giant needle stuck in my thigh and be rushed to the hospital. Now, I don't know the full exchange between my mom and the teacher because this happened so long ago, and my mom doesn't remember exactly what was said, just that she was extremely angry. I do know that she tore into the teacher because everyone in class could hear my mom yelling through the phone. For the first time ever, I saw my teacher actually nervous. After my mom gave the teacher a piece of her mind, the teacher brought me to the corner of the room and handed me a bag of Skittles, which she apparently had the entire time. It was disappointing to be alone for the activity, but I happily did my assignment, eating my packet of Skittles, fully aware that my teacher was fuming at her desk, annoyed that a 7-year-old knew better than she did. Later, it was revealed that my mom sent an email to the school's principal. Fortunately for the teacher's case, it was my mom's second draft and contained nicer words. That teacher had to do a refresher course on allergies with the nurse, which had already been shown to her at the beginning of the year. I guess my school was desperate for teachers because she continued to teach at that school, even though she had other incidents. As much as I'd like to say I ate the M&Ms and watched as her career deflated like a parade balloon, I did not. As the wise Sid the Sloth once said, "No thanks, I choose life." Story 2. I live in a small gated community with about 30 to 40 houses. However, unlike most gated communities, the sidewalk leading into our neighborhood from the outside isn't gated, meaning literally anyone can come in. There's no guard at the post next to the gate since it's an automatic gate that opens with either a code or a sensor, and the cameras on the sentry post are purely for show and don't actually work. My dad has a really bad habit of leaving the doors unlocked, all of them. This includes the front door and the two back sliding doors, one in the living room and one in the master bedroom. He does this because he primarily works from home, which is an important detail for later, and likes to go into the backyard to smoke. Locking the doors every time he goes out is tedious for him. Whenever he leaves the house to replenish his cigarette supply or get lunch, he always leaves the doors unlocked. This triggered my anxiety because, around the time we moved in, there had been a robbery at one of our neighbors' houses. They had left the back door open for their dog and stepped out briefly to pick up a child from school. They were gone for only 10 minutes, and when they returned, the mom's jewelry box and an expensive watch had been stolen. Naturally, I wanted the doors to be locked, especially when no one was home, even if it was just for a moment. When I'm home with someone else, I feel a little more at ease, but at night, I always triple-check to make sure the doors are locked. My dad doesn't lock them then either, so I have to sneak into the master bedroom when my parents are asleep, just to make sure their sliding door is locked. One day, I went out with a friend for the entire day. I had reminded my parents that I would likely be back pretty late. We left my house around 11 a.m., and he dropped me off at 9 p.m. When I got out of his car, I noticed that my mom's car was there, but my dad's wasn't. They only take my dad's car when they're going out for a while. I got a bit nervous, but trusted that my mom would have at least checked to make sure the doors were locked before they left. But, of course, they weren't. When I reached the front door, I looked in the small crevice between the wall and the door to see if the lock was engaged. It wasn't. I went inside, and guess what? Neither of the back doors was locked either. I was livid. I immediately texted my mom, asking how long they had been out and how long they planned on staying out. She replied with the times, and I felt steam practically blowing out of my ears. They had been gone since 2 p.m. and weren't planning on coming back until near midnight. The house could have been completely stripped of all our belongings in that amount of time. I called her and started shouting that I had just gotten home and found all the doors unlocked. She panicked in response and asked if anything was out of place. After quickly checking the house, I deduced that nothing seemed to have been taken, so no one must have noticed. She sighed in relief and said that she had asked my dad to lock all the doors before they left, and she would talk with him about it when they returned. When they got back, my dad was angry at me. He started yelling, saying, "This is my house, I do what I want." When I protested that we could have been robbed, he decided to show off just how big his ego is, saying, "Honey, look at me. No one would dare rob this house while I'm living in it. Everyone here is scared of me." I stood there, staring at him, my jaw dropped. At that moment, I wondered how my mom fell for this man. He put on a smug "Ha, I've won" smirk and added, "Nobody's brave enough to rob this house, relax." Fine. I'll relax. For the next couple of weeks, I made sure to go out of the house as much as possible, usually to my previously mentioned friend's place. I always took all my valuables with me, including my laptop, my handheld gaming console with all its games, my portable gaming system, and some of my expensive jewelry. The reason for this is because my parents like going out together when I'm not home, as they feel they'd be obligated to bring me with them if I were there. I had told my friend what was going on, so they suggested leaving my valuables at their house so I wouldn't have to bring them with me everywhere I went, to which I happily agreed. And then it finally happened. As I mentioned before, my dad works from home. His office, which is just a large desk with 2 laptops and 2 monitors, was in the living room, near the sliding door. His work was primarily done on a laptop that cost well over $900. He had tweaked and added some things to it to make it even better than it was before. I'm not very tech-savvy, so I'm not 100% sure what exactly he did to improve it. The other laptop was about $500, which he used mostly for personal stuff. One day, I ran out of paper in my journal and decided to walk to the local big box retail store, which was about 10 minutes away, to buy a new one. My mom was at work, and my dad was likely out getting lunch, so I left the empty house, carelessly leaving the doors unlocked. I took my sweet time walking to the store, the usual 20-30 minute walk too, and from there took about an hour and 15 minutes. When I got to the final crosswalk to go across the street to my community, my phone rang. It was my dad. He was in a panic, saying he couldn't find his laptops. They weren't on his desk, in his bags, or anywhere else he might have left them. He asked me if I had seen them, and I told him, "I saw them on your desk before I left. Are you sure they're not there?" After a long pause, he asked where I was, and I told him I was walking back from the store. He didn't know I had taken the scenic route home, so he thought that in the span of 20 or so minutes, someone had come into the house and unplugged both his laptops from the monitors, taking them, the chargers, and his spare cash in one of the drawers. When I got home, he had already gone to our neighbors' houses, asking if they had seen anyone enter our home. All but one said no. That one neighbor told him they had seen a man enter the house through the sliding door to the living room and leave, but they thought it was my dad since they had frequently seen him leaving the house through the back doors, especially during the past few weeks. My dad looked like half of his soul had been sucked out of his body when he found this out and came back. It was quite amusing watching him explain to my mom why his laptops, spare cash, and my mom's tablet were missing. Some calls to the police were made. The neighbor described what the man was wearing to the police, and after they questioned some other neighbors, one who lived close to the gate said they clearly saw a man with the described clothing walking out of the community with a large bag. After about 2 weeks of searching, the police found the man and arrested him. The laptops and my mom's tablet were returned, but my dad's personal laptop had been factory reset, the tablet's screen was cracked, and the money was gone. The doors always stayed locked after that. Story 3. I used to work at a gas station, me being only 20 at the time. I needed a job since I was new to my area after moving from one state to another, and the job was good. The manager, she was awesome. She was the sweetest thing. Well, that was before she left though, and the manager after was just as awesome. I then moved to a new apartment, but there was this previous assistant manager when I started working there. Let's call him Richard, and let's call the first manager Angel. Richard was known to be a very hostile, creepy guy when not around the manager, and made us try to do his load of the work and blamed us for being lazy when we couldn't do it. My co-workers and I had brought the situation to the higher-ups numerous times, and as much as she wanted us to be heard, Angel couldn't do anything, and it came to a boiling point 2 months down the line on my end. Little fact about me, I am timid, I am autistic, and I get very, very stressed when someone threatens me with my life. I get very, very sick to my core and lack breathing if I have to deal with that, and I use that to my advantage. On the shift I was supposed to be working that day, I had asked my friend Cross if I could borrow his speaker to listen to my music. My manager said as long as I can do my job behind the register and Cross was okay with it, I can listen to my music, and I asked specifically if I can borrow it to take home for a couple days until my new speaker came in that I brought the previous paycheck. Cross said okay, and shift change happened and Richard came in. He sees me listening to my music, and he asks me to play his music from his phone on Cross's speaker. I said no, the speaker is mine for the next couple days, and I don't want to be held responsible for any damage. He then whispers under his breath for me to hear, but for the cameras in the store to not pick up. I have a knife, you know, and I basically in a single moment, and quickly too, came up with a way to end his nonsense. The revenge. I yelled at him loud enough to him so the cameras can pick it up, knowing that he would have to say something to defend himself. Why are you threatening me with a knife? And I kinda had a mixture of fear if he actually had one, and determination to make this man suffer for me and my co-workers' verbal abuse and harassment for the past couple months. He backed away and said, hey, it was just a joke, chill out. And I knew I had to do something because at that point, I said, a joke, hot. Here is a good joke, have fun working alone. I quit. I walked out, called my mother who I lived with nearby, explained the situation in tears after the adrenaline and fear finished its end, and I then was told and called my manager to explain to her the situation. I then told her that I knew he had the knife on him, because I saw a pocket knife in the office, and it was a custom one with his name on it. Mom then picked me up and took me back to the store to talk with my manager. I wound up in a situation with the manager, the branch manager, and the district manager asking about what happened, and I explained it again, calmer now, in full, and they asked if I was okay. I told them, "No, I have a guy who has been harassing my other coworkers, verbally assaulting me and the others, try and threaten an autistic person who did nothing except say no to using a speaker, get threatened with a knife. I do not feel safe with him around." They asked me about the speaker. I called Cross, and he confirmed I asked to borrow the speaker overnight and backed me up with what the assistant manager has done in the past. And at that point, police were called. They checked the cameras and heard me yelling about the knife. And after a few months, I come to learn he got fired from his last job and was in jail for threatening physical harm to a disabled person, sexual harassment, sexual assault, and unauthorized concealed weapon. He wanted a speaker. He got a speaker, a few speakers on a podium, who put himself in jail about a week after. Story 4. Once upon a scorching summer day, I found myself standing in line at the famous Sweet Delights ice cream stand in the heart of New York City. The heat was unbearable, and the line seemed to stretch for miles. My name is Emma, a 25-year-old woman who had recently moved to the city to pursue my dreams of becoming a writer. The hustle and bustle of the city always fascinated me, but dealing with entitled people was not something I anticipated. Little did I know that this day at the ice cream stand would introduce me to an infuriating character named Karen, who could easily be the star of Rentitled People. As I finally reached the front of the line, relief washed over me. But just as I was about to order my much-needed ice cream cone, a shrill voice cut through the air. It was Karen, accompanied by her 5-year-old son, Timmy. "I can't believe we have to wait in this ridiculous line," Karen exclaimed, huffing loudly. She was a woman in her late 30s, with a perfectly styled bob and an air of entitlement that surrounded her like a cloud. Timmy clung to her leg, eyes wide with anticipation. Trying my best to keep my cool, I turned to Karen and said, "Well, it is a popular ice cream stand, and everyone here seems to be patiently waiting their turn." Karen's eyes narrowed, and her face flushed with anger. "Who asked for your opinion?" she snapped, looking me up and down. "You should let us cut in line. My precious Timmy deserves his ice cream first." I couldn't help but roll my eyes at her audacity. Oh, I didn't realize Timmy's ice cream needs were more important than everyone else's. My bad. Karen's face turned red, and she seemed to have lost all sense of reason. She stepped forward, pointing her finger at me. "You think you're so clever, huh? Just wait until I tell your manager about this disrespectful behavior." I couldn't help but smirk. "Good luck with that. I'm not a manager. I'm just a regular customer. And besides, I don't think your complaint will carry much weight when you're trying to cut in line." As Karen continued to argue and complain, the line around us grew restless. People started chiming in, supporting my point of view. Karen, frustrated by the lack of sympathy, began to lose her temper completely. In a fit of rage, Karen lunged toward me, attempting to physically attack me. But karma had other plans for her. As she lunged forward, she slipped on a stray ice cream cone, crashing onto the ground with a resounding thud. The entire crowd erupted in laughter. Lying on the ground, Karen seethed with anger, while I couldn't help but relish in the moment. Revenge was sweet, even if it was served with a side of melted ice cream. As Karen stormed off, covered in sticky ice cream residue, I couldn't resist a parting shot. "Watch your step next time, Karen. Maybe you should have been more concerned about your own actions rather than everyone else's." The crowd cheered, applauding my quick wit and Karen's defeat. And as I finally savored my long-awaited ice cream cone, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Sometimes, entitled people like Karen needed a taste of their own medicine. So, dear readers of Rentitled People, remember that entitled people may try to push their way through, but there will always be someone ready to put them in their place. Story 5. This happened several years ago when I was part of a strict Christian church, and I was also in a leadership position. I'm writing this on mobile, so I apologize if it looks a bit off. Anyway, on to the story. When I was 22 and a young, impressionable adult, I was part of the media team for this church. We were responsible for creating videos, flyers, posting on social media, taking pictures, and so on. This was volunteer work. But the pastor, let's call him Pastor Corruption, was a strict, cold-hearted dictator of the religious institution. He would often give us last-minute projects that kept us up all night to make a video to play during the service the next day. We averaged 3 to 5 hours of sleep per night. However, I was in school during this time, so to stay on top of my homework and other projects, I averaged closer to 2 to 3 hours per night. To be honest, I'm not sure how I survived, only experiencing occasional bouts of dark thoughts, paranoia, or delusions. Pastor Corruption loved money. He had a giant 6-bedroom house for just himself and his wife, complete with heated driveways and the latest model Cadillac, which sat atop that very driveway. The church building itself was overinflated, capable of seating close to 1,000 people, but maybe only 400 attended regularly. More than Pastor Corruption loved money, he loved other people's money. 70% of the sermons were about how you needed to give everything you had to the church, or else you didn't love God and were destined for eternal punishment. This is ironic, considering that their accountant had been caught embezzling funds in the past. This demand for money went beyond the expected 10% of your income, commonly referred to as tithes. It included pledges, fundraisers, donations for church events, and attending retreats that made a profit from the attendees. Pastor Corruption and his group of associate pastors, who also shamed people for not giving money and being poor, would openly brag about how God blessed them after these rounds of financial coercion. One day, as Pastor Corruption's birthday approached, his group of associate pastors decided that last year's model of his car was too old and that he needed a brand new one. They took a pledge from all the ministry departments to pay for this new car. The minimum pledge you were allowed to make was $300, and the media team was no exception. I, being a broke college kid with a minimum wage, part-time job, decided that was impossible and that I just wasn't going to pledge anything. This led to several hour-long lectures and shaming sessions about how I was seen as a leader. I wasn't seen at all since I was always working behind the scenes, laugh out loud, and needed to set an example. Finally, I got fed up and worn down to the point that I confessed I couldn't pledge because that would mean using all my rent money. At that time, I lived with some other leaders from the church and shared a room with another girl. $300 doesn't seem like a lot now, but at the time, for not even having my own space or a place for my bed, this was outrageous, especially for a broke college kid. A girl who lived with me and also lectured me told me to just pledge the money anyway, and I could pay rent later. Well, I was coerced into giving the $300 for Pastor Corruption's new car, and now he had 2 brand new Cadillacs sitting in his heated driveway. 3 days after rent was due, the girl who lectured me about pledging came up and asked me for the rent money. The conversation went something like this. "I don't have it yet." "What do you mean you don't have it? I gave you 3 extra days to figure out something." "What am I supposed to do? Pull it out of thin air?" "Maybe you should be more responsible with your spending." I have spent $2.16 on myself in the last 3 weeks, and it was to get a coffee so I don't fall asleep while driving because of a lack of sleep. "I'll give you until the end of this week, but you can't expect us to cover you any longer than that. You are being extremely selfish." Now, on top of worrying about juggling projects between school and the church, I needed to worry about not getting evicted. Then I came up with a plan. I would just pawn my laptop. My laptop was brand new, as it had just come out recently, and I had decided to splurge on the latest model when my last 6-year-old laptop stopped working a few months before. I used it for schoolwork, but there were labs I could use on campus that would help me get by. However, the other thing I used it for was media projects for the church. You know how Pastor Corruption liked money? Well, he didn't like spending money, so the media team had a 13-year-old desktop computer that was overloaded with files, severely slowing down its already laggy performance and causing it to take several hours to render videos if they didn't fail or get corrupted. When I got my laptop, it was fairly decent at rendering large video files in under 10 minutes and had amazing clarity and graphics, so they convinced me to switch to using my laptop for all things media related rather than using the outdated desktop. I didn't mind because it didn't interfere with my schoolwork that much. However, all the templates for social media, other videos, and files were now on my laptop, meaning that every week I was responsible for getting everything updated and handing off the final version of the file to the head of the media team. The girls I lived with would help me edit these files when we were home, and they were the leaders of the media team. This means that all the recent files of projects they needed were on my laptop, and no backups were made on the church-owned desktop. I pawned my laptop, got the rent money, and paid the leader without saying anything about how I managed to get the money in a single day. Saturday night rolled around, which is usually when we worked on the video files we needed for the next day, and they asked me where my laptop was so we could get started. I don't have it. Where is it? I pawned it. What? I pawned it. Why? I needed to pay you rent. I had no other way to get you the money. I couldn't afford the pledge, but you graciously gave me an extra 3 days to pay it and make up for my rent, which I used to pay for the pledge. This is one of the most valuable items I own, so I figured it was the quickest way to repay you. At this point, they started freaking out. They wanted to get the laptop back right then, but the pawn shop was closed. So, they rushed to the church and fired up the old desktop, desperately trying to recreate the videos we needed from scratch. However, they had no backups since my laptop was being exclusively used, and the programs and versions that I was using compared to what the old desktop had were completely different. Think Adobe Creative Cloud versus Final Cut Pro. In the end, we didn't have anything ready in time for the service that Sunday morning, and the entire media team got yelled at by pastor corruption. I got yelled at twice by the leaders on the media team, but it was worth it to see them panic. Several months later, I ended up leaving the church altogether and was nice enough to give them all the files of the work I had on my laptop. My only regret is being so amicable when I left, because forget that place and forget pastor corruption. However, last I heard, most of the people I knew there have left, and the church has downsized considerably and moved buildings. I assume they never got a new desktop for the media team after I left. This is just one of the many outrageous aspects of this church, but it made me never want to deal with organized religion again, and now I'm mostly agnostic. Story 6. I was emotional when I typed this and am less so now, but I tried to post this a few hours ago on a different forum. Though it was deleted, I don't know why, as I wasn't familiar with online forums before all this. Since this is anonymous and my therapist approves of me writing things out here, I'm posting this as it can also serve as an update. I'm not changing anything, so below is the original post in its entirety. I can't own up to my mistakes and wish I didn't exist. Edit to say this is long, and I'm sorry, but I needed to write this out somewhere. I can't muster the courage to say it aloud or tell anyone I actually know. I can't even start to list how much I have messed up, and it's hurt my stepsister. But yesterday might have been the worst of it all. It wasn't too long ago, a few months, that I started to realize how much of a narcissistic jerk my now late father was, and how much he seemed to really enjoy emotionally abusing people. Dulce, my sister, was his favorite target, not physically. Looking back, it seems like he delighted in hurting her feelings or making her feel worthless, and I may never know why. She's told me it's been so bad at points that she fell into self-harm and had thoughts of ending her life. The trauma runs deep, and she's only now able to start healing because not long ago, my dad passed away. The problem is, I was pretty brainwashed by Dad to think this was normal and that she was just sensitive, basically excusing it all away. I also treated her poorly, indirectly, and yes, even directly, on a smaller scale than Dad. I won't excuse this or try to defend it. I feel absolutely devastated and ashamed about it, to the point that if she's anything but happy or okay, it makes my chest tighten like I can't breathe. It's almost a trauma response. I know it's not healthy, but I've done a full 180 and now desperately need to protect and take care of her, almost to assuage my guilt or shame. It's an unrealistic way of thinking, and I'm in active and intense therapy about many things, including that. My father, before his death, wrote letters to many people, including the family, and we each got one. He wrote them when he received his terminal diagnosis and had his lawyer hold them sealed to give to the addressed individuals. Dulce said she probably wasn't going to read hers because she was afraid it would only cause her pain or make her hate him. Well, last night, she came over to help me with things regarding my property, and she disclosed that she read the letter. It blamed her for his death and had demands that she better fulfill to make up for the fact that she killed him by being what he often insulted her as when he was alive. She's been devastated, crying at the drop of a hat since, having panic attacks, and sometimes spiraling into outright hysterics. We all assumed she was simply mourning the complicated nature of the fact that she loved Dad, but he abused her so intensely. Well, as she likes to say, yes, and it's all of that, but also that his letter, his last words to her ever, were affecting her so much. She carried the letter in her pocket and nearly compulsively reread it too many times to count during this entire time. She was crying, telling me all this, and I started having what I now realize was an anxiety attack because I couldn't take, process, or allow this man to hurt her again from beyond the grave. And I did arguably the worst thing I have ever done to her. She stayed over, so I went into overdrive to lift her spirits and fix this. I took her to a movie eatery to see a 3D movie, then took her to her favorite ice cream shop, and afterward dropped her at the nail salon to get a manicure and pedicure, my treat. I gave her space after she commented, "You're doing that hovering thing again." When she was done, I took her to my house and cooked one of her favorite dishes she mentioned loving since childhood. So far, so okay, right? Well, she was pretty exhausted and a little drunk by the time I had exhausted all the options of things to do to make her smile. And it was late, so she stayed over. I couldn't sleep. I was too wound up. Around 2 a.m., I peeked in to check on her, and she was out like a light. I noticed that letter, the whole reason in my mind that she was suffering was right there on the nightstand. In a post about this letter editing to add the link, it was suggested I encourage her to burn it, or make it a sibling thing where we do it together or with our other sister, etc. All healthy choices. Reasonable. But I was not feeling reasonable. It was like I saw red and had tunnel vision, not excusing anything. So I took the letter and put it in my study drawer until I figured out how best to destroy it, not just tear it up, but annihilate it into nothingness. This morning went about as terribly as possible because I woke to her wails. Wails! She was sobbing, rocking back and forth on the floor in the living room, screaming that she lost it. It took the better part of an hour to get her to string a full sentence together. She then explained what she thought had happened. She got drunk and probably either got angry and flushed it down the toilet or simply lost it somewhere in the many places we'd been the day before. She started to think the latter and was calling herself stupid, worthless, and many other things Dad would call her, saying he was right about her and that this was a big example of it. I had never seen her so hysterical and incoherent ever. It was the worst possible reaction and the complete opposite of what I thought my actions would cause. I watched her search as she kept insulting herself, crying, breaking down, and searching again, and I just couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. I was scared to death that after everything, she would just plain hate me, rightfully so, and cut me out of her life for good. We just lost Dad, and it was killing me to think I would lose her too, especially after we really started to reconcile and become close. She's the best person I know and has forgiven me for unforgivable things and loved me despite the fact that I can be so difficult. So I lied to her face out of fear and pretended to look for this letter, only to find it in my study. She chalked it all up to drunkenly putting it in there before she got tired and went to bed, and I went along with it. She calmed down a little, but immediately sat down to reread it. After breakfast, she went to run errands and go to work, and I'm at home feeling like absolute garbage. I don't even know where to start unpacking this whole situation. I don't know what to even do. I have a therapy session this evening, and I'm counting down to it because I'm far too frazzled, emotional, and just hating myself to even function. I've never hated myself more, but I feel like I deep down know that I will never have the courage to tell her the truth. So here I am, trying to just get it off my chest. I feel like a colossal piece of garbage.